shot in the back, and it exited his chest.
Lieutenant Kenda is on the hunt for a faceless gunman with a mysterious motive.
Our question is, why did this happen?
Did he make somebody mad? Was he at the wrong place at the wrong time?
That name hit me like a slap in the face.
You don't come out, we're coming in!
Then, an attempt to settle a score turns fatal.
Do I know you? Whoa!
Jealousy and rage and possession. It's a pretty bad cocktail.
Murder's like the economy. It goes up and down. You have good years, bad years. Something I've always found interesting, when murder is down somewhere, it's down everywhere. It's almost as if there is a national biorhythm. But could I explain that? No.
Clyde Williams and Barry Loggins were driving home after a 4th of July get-together. It was a nice summer night. They had the windows down.
July 4th in Colorado Springs area, there's a lot of people out celebrating early, celebrating late, running fireworks all the time.
Bro, I'm so psyched about this weekend. You're going to Bobby's party, right?
For sure.
Nice.
Man, them Roman candles he got, gonna be awesome.
Dude, what the hell is this guy doing? God, help me. Please. Yo, what happened, man? Oh my God. What are we gonna do?
They see that he's been shot. This guy is in bad shape. He's bleeding profusely, and he subsequently loses consciousness.
Oh no, dude. Wake up. Wake up. Wake up. Somebody help. Call 911 now.
Is he okay?
Call 911.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
"30 minutes later, Kenda steps out onto East San Miguel.
Hey, Mike, so what do we got? The Vic is 27-year-old Donald Zampa, shot once in the back. He's currently at Memorial Hospital in critical condition.
Donald Zampa is 27 years old. He's only been in Colorado Springs for a few months, and he is a maintenance worker at a local motel.
Any witnesses? The two guys that found him didn't see anything. Now, we are currently canvassing the neighborhood as we speak. This is our guy right here, huh? Yeah, right there.
The crime scene itself is bloodstained, of course, and there's some medical waste laying around, and also the shirt and sport coat worn by the victim. It is unusual to find someone wearing a sport coat and tie in this neighborhood at 2:30 in the morning. So where did he come from, and where was he going to, and what interrupted that?
Now, the slug is over here. CSI said it looks like a 38. So it went right through him, huh? Yeah.
He's been shot in the back, and it exited his chest.
Could have been a robbery. Did you find any money on him? You know, I thought the same thing, except that his wallet's still in his pants right there, with 20 bucks still in it. Huh.
Well, that's strange. If this is a robbery, why wouldn't they have taken his wallet?
It could be an intentional assault against Donald Zampa for some reason, some perceived wrong he's committed against someone, some enemy of his. At this point, we have many more questions than we have answers.
Hey, Sergeant. Got the kid that called in the shooting if you want to speak to him.
Sure, where is he?
It's right down here.
Chris Powell is a white male, about 18 years old, kind of small in stature.
Can you tell us what you're doing out here tonight?
Well, I wasn't out. I was at my buddy's place down the street.
What were you doing there?
I'm staying there. I came from Ohio, so I'm kind of figuring out the job situation. You know, it's really hard these days.
Yeah, I understand. But tonight, how'd you end up calling the police?
He tells us that he hears a gunshot. He looks out, he sees the victim down and sees two other people running up to him to help.
So I figured the best thing to do was call you guys.
So you didn't see the shooter or anyone suspicious?
No, sir.
You look extremely nervous, Mr. Powell. Is there more to this story that you're not telling us?
Is everything all right, Chris?
Yeah, I'm fine. It was just crazy to see, you know? That's all. Is that guy gonna be okay?
We don't know. Thank you. He was awfully nervous. Sure was.
Here's an 18-year-old, probably has never seen somebody shot. He may not be hiding anything, but we, being cops, are gonna question that.
Hey, Sergeant. We just got word from the hospital. The victim's conscious.
Okay, good. I'm gonna take a ride over to Memorial. I want you to go ahead and supervise the rest of the canvas. I'll be right back.
You got it.
This is good for us. There might be something he could tell us that'll help clear up this matter.
Excuse me, can I have a minute with him?
Sure. Need to make it quick. He's not out of the woods yet. We're prepping him for another surgery.
The victim in this case is shot in the back. It's a perforating gunshot wound and ends up going out the chest. So anytime you have somebody who's got a perforating gunshot wound to the chest or abdomen, there's a lot of very important organs that are between the entrance and the exit wound. Those cases are immediately life-threatening, and they have to be treated that way. You're gonna start bleeding, you're gonna have significant pain, you may not be able to breathe really well. All those things can contribute to loss of consciousness. When a bullet passes through a body, it's going to cause damage not only in the organs it pokes holes in, but it can also cause damage other places as this big pressure wave goes through the body. So number one, you're worried about bleeding. Two, significant injuries to vital organs like lungs and heart. Even if you survive the initial period, you're not out of the woods yet because there's a significant risk of infection that's going to be created by these injuries. There's a lot of things, obviously, that have to go right for you to be able to survive.
This may be the last opportunity for Donald Zampa to say anything, because if he doesn't survive the surgery, then the only statement we're going to get is what we're going to get right now.
Donald, I'm Sergeant Kenda. How you feeling?
I've been better.
I'm sure. Listen, I need you to remember everything you possibly can about what happened tonight.
Okay. I went to Graham's for a drink and to watch the game.
Graham's was more of a neighborhood bar where people hung out. People knew each other, and Donald was a regular customer.
He tells us that he left the bar and he was walking home. As he's walking, he hears somebody yell at him.
Don't turn around.
Whoa, man.
And he feels what he believes to be a gun pushed into his back.
Keep your hands up and get on your knees.
Come on, man. Easy. I had no idea what was happening, so I just did whatever the guy told me. But then as soon as I knelt down, I heard this loud crack and my chest got hot. Then everything went numb and I couldn't move.
So, of course, we asked Donald, do you have enemies? Is there somebody out to get you? He said, oh, no, I don't make enemies, I make friends. So that eliminates the possibility of most likely a known person to him. This is someone that doesn't know him at all.
Now, I know you said you had your back to the shooter, but did you see him at all or have any idea what he looks like?
No. Even if I did, I don't think it would have mattered much. Without my glasses, I'm legally blind.
Sergeant, it's time to head out.
All right, just one more question. Is there anything at all you can remember about this guy?
Yeah, actually. He had an accent, maybe like a Hispanic accent.
All right, well, thank you.
Sorry, Kenda.
I understand.
Kenda heads back to the crime scene with troubles on his mind.
And I'm thinking to myself, okay, what do we know? Is he an Hispanic male? Probably. Does he know Donald Zampa? Probably not. We have very little to go on here. Very little indeed.
Mike? Hey, Kenda. You get anything at the hospital? No, I didn't get much. It says the shooter sounds Hispanic. That's funny. We got a witness who says he saw the shooter, thinks he looks Hispanic. Really?
Well, now, maybe that's our guy. That's the first interesting thing I've heard tonight. We're working on the shooting of 27-year-old Donald Zampa. All we know is his shooter sounded Hispanic. But now we have a witness who claims to have seen the shooter. Our witness is Edward Esterly. He's living immediately adjacent to the scene.
We were told you saw something tonight?
He reports that he has been up and down during the night because in the last several days, they've been having problems in this neighborhood with break-ins of cars.
When I looked out the window to check on my car, I saw this Hispanic guy looking into it. But when I got outside, the guy was gone. And then I heard the gunshot, and I got the hell out of there.
So could that mean that this Hispanic male was looking to steal something out of cars? And at that moment, he notices Mr. Zampa strolling down the street. And does he decide he needs to remove a potential witness?
Don't turn around. Keep your hands up and get on your knees.
What this guy looked like?
He was definitely Hispanic, I guess 25 to 30 years old.
You remember what he was wearing?
Yeah, he had on this weird-looking Hawaiian shirt.
Hawaiian shirt.
Is this guy possibly the suspect? We don't know, but that's where we're headed at this point.
Hey, Sarge. Hey, we've still got a guy matching that description.
Where is he?
He's in the cruiser.
Thanks for your help.
Well, could this be our mysterious man?
Step out.
Tell us your name.
Miguel Diaz.
He does not have a Hispanic accent. He has no discernible accent whatsoever.
That really kind of blows our theory out of the water, but we still look into him.
So what were you doing out here tonight, Miguel?
I was on my way home, and I heard a couple guys shout that someone got shot. Saw the guy lying on the street, so I ran off, found a payphone, called 911.
You check on that for us?
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, we got some reports of a guy in a Hawaiian shirt peering into vehicles. What can you tell me about that?
I just really like cars. Checks out.
We were able to confirm that he had called 911 to report this crime. So his story is holding true. Maybe he's a BMV suspect and not a murder suspect.
Okay, Miguel. You're free to go. Just make sure we get his name to burglary with him.
You got it.
So we're still at the beginning. Who confronted Donald Zampa? It wasn't Miguel. Then who was it?
Over the next few days, no new leads materialize.
Everyone we've encountered so far who could be, might be the guy is not the guy. The only good news is Zampa continues to live.
So in a case like this, to have a gunshot wound that goes through your back and then out your chest, it's really a miracle that an organ or the spinal cord wasn't struck. Every organ's right next to each other. So to make it from one side to the other without hitting one of those and killing you is a matter of inches that saves this man's life.
Well, as police are getting frustrated about the lack of leads in this case, they do get some good news, and that's that Donald did well in surgery and he's gonna survive. So that's great. But this is gonna be something that changes his life forever. He's probably obviously gonna suffer the physical effects of what happened to him, but emotionally, can you imagine the fact that not only did this happen to me, but whoever did it to me is still out there, hasn't been found. They still don't know why it happened to me. It'd be the kind of thing that probably for the rest of your life, you'd always be looking over your shoulder, wondering, could something like this happen to me again? It would be a very fearful, life-changing experience that, yes, I recovered from it physically, I survived, but emotionally, it's always going to be in my mind and a part of my life.
But an unexpected tip is about to send the case in a whole new direction.
Sir, there's a call for you. Somebody from Cincinnati. Want to talk about the Zampa case?
Cincinnati? Which line?
2.
It is unusual to get a call from another state about a case that's only a few days old in your city. That is a real indicator that whoever is on the other end of that phone has some direct knowledge.
Sergeant Kenda, who am I speaking to?
Hello, sir. Yes, my name's Charles Norton. I'm calling because my stepson has something he needs to talk to you about regarding the shooting the other night.
And who's your stepson?
His name is Chris Powell.
Chris Powell, huh?
That name hit me like a slap in the face. You mean the nervous little kid that was at the crime scene?
Hello?
We were suspicious at the time that Mr. Powell knew more than he was saying, and we were right. So the phone rings, and it's a call from Cincinnati, Ohio, and it is a wealth of information.
Chris, this is Sergeant Kenda. You remember me?
Yes?
And you have something you need to tell me?
Christopher.
You can hear in the background his stepfather basically saying, you either tell the truth or you're out on your ear and you have no place to go.
I didn't tell you the whole story.
I didn't think so, Christopher, so here is your second chance to be truthful.
The other night when I said I was at home, I was actually headed home with a friend of mine.
He identifies his friend as Rodney McFarland. He's 21 years old.
Mr. McFarland, he's a white guy?
Yes, sir.
We're kind of questioning this because we're looking for Hispanic male.
All right, so what happened?
Well, Rodney was driving.
No.
What's wrong, man? And as soon as we pulled up on the San Miguel, the car stalled.
Oh, no, come on, you piece of crap.
Rodney's upset because he didn't have any money to fix this car to make it run. And they both see this guy coming toward them on the sidewalk, wearing a suit and tie, and he's obviously drunk.
Look at this fool.
Rodney turns to Powell and says, I'm gonna get this guy. I'm gonna rob him and take his money.
Oh, you can't just rob the guy, you know? What if you get caught, huh?
Don't worry. Disguise my voice.
And he told me he was gonna speak in a Hispanic accent, so the guy wouldn't be able to identify him.
Chris Powell's explanation for the accent gives newfound credibility to his story.
The only person who knew that was the victim, and the only way you could know it is if you were standing there like you said you were. I absolutely believe Mr. Powell has come forward, finally, with the truth.
All right, so what happened next?
Well, he ran up to the guy. I heard a bang, and I just started running. You know, now listen, I tried to do the right thing, you know, by calling the police. It's just that I got a little scared afterwards. So, I'm back here with my folks in Cincinnati.
Chris wanted to do the right thing, and he maybe needed that extra support from his family to come forward and give that information.
Despite Chris Powell's story, there's still one detail that doesn't add up.
Do you know why Rodney shot the victim instead of taking his money?
I don't know. I couldn't even believe he did it.
So do you know where the gun is?
Yeah. He told me he keeps it in this, like, big case for cassettes. It's probably in his room somewhere.
Where's Rodney live?
We're able to obtain a warrant for the arrest of Rodney, and we go to that residence in effort to execute that warrant.
You make an assumption that Rodney is armed and he's going to resist, so you approach guns drawn.
Wait, hey,
We're looking for Rodney McFarland.
my brother? He ain't here.
You sure about that? Harboring a fugitive's a felony.
Mr. McFarland, where is your brother?
If Joe Kenda tells you you're going to tell me where Rodney is, you're going to tell him where Rodney is.
He's in the back.
Step aside.
This is a very intense and high-risk operation at this point because he could be on the other side of the door just waiting for us to come in.
Brett! This is the police! Come out with your hands where we can see them! You don't come out, we're coming in!
And you won't like what happens next when we come in.
Let me see your hands!
I didn't mean to.
Go ahead and cuff him.
Rodney doesn't want to engage. He is just frightened.
Turn around.
Where's he going, Rodney?
I don't know. I want a lawyer.
All right, get him out of here.
Got it.
Fine, that is your constitutional right, Mr. McFarland. But right now, you're going to jail.
Let's find that gun. Hey.
We do find the gun in a cassette case, just as it was described.
This looks like a .38. Well, that's the one. this bag and get the hell out of here.
Although Rodney McFarland refuses to talk, ballistics testing on the gun does all the talking Kenda needs.
The gun is determined to be the weapon that fired the shot that entered and exited Mr. Zompek, and further, the weapon is defective. It would easily fire without touching the trigger.
It's a defective piece of crap, is really what it comes down to. And if you think about our case, it could very well be just that. The defective gun caused this to be a shooting as opposed to just a robbery.
Evidence of a faulty gun gives Kenda a much better understanding of how events unfolded the night Zampa was shot.
Damn it. Just try turning it back on. Look, it ain't gonna work. The hell am I gonna get the money to fix this damn thing?
He's complaining that this thing is nickel and diming him to death.
And Mr. Zompek comes walking down the street in his coat and tie, and looks like he might have a few dollars on his person. McFarland has no knowledge of who Donald Zampa is or cares. He is a victim of opportunity.
Look at what he's wearing. He's definitely got some cash on. Hey, whoa, what the hell, man? What are you doing? Don't worry. This guy's my voice. Wait, Rod, stop. Don't turn around. Whoa.
And Rodney McFarland is not Hispanic by any stretch of the imagination, but he used that accent to throw off the victim.
Keep your hands up and get on your knees. Come on, man. Okay. Now give me
It's an accidental discharge. McFarland is shocked that the gun goes off.
God, help me. Please.
No robbery is attempted. Now it's run away.
It wasn't his intent. It was an accident, but it was an accident committed in the course of a criminal episode, which still makes it a crime.
Rodney McFarland pleads guilty to attempted aggravated robbery and is sentenced to 10 years in prison. Chris Powell is cleared of all charges.
There is a happy ending to this story, because even though Donald had all these cards stacked against him, he survived. He went on to fully recover and happily marry and have children and grandchildren. That would give you a whole new perspective on life, I think.
Armed robbery is one of the only violent crimes where the victims are selected at random. In the case of Donald Zampa, what was his crime? Being in the wrong place at precisely the wrong moment. He's just a very lucky guy. He lived through it. Many don't.
It's getting late, and delivery man Kirk Farrell is making his last stop of the night.
Kirk Farrell is a convenience store delivery man. He goes in late nights to multiple stores, takes out the old products, bring in the new products, and he hears two cars pull up.
Hey!
There's a sound of a disturbance, people yelling.
Hey, dude, chill.
The voices are getting more raised and the situation is getting more tense. And all of a sudden, he hears a shot.
He's not gonna shoot me. Stop!
He starts to take cover behind his truck. And at that time, he hears a second gunshot.
I'm sure he was scared and very confused. It's not like he can just call 911. He's going to have to go back into the store to do that.
Within the hour, Lieutenant Joe Kenda pulls up to the scene of the city's 23rd homicide of the year.
In 1991, we had an exceptionally high number of homicides for the size of city at that time. This particular case was one short of a record of 24 set in 1974.
Hey, Lieutenant. Hey, Gary. So what we got? We got one shooting victim, 21-year-old Todd Iverson. Kid was rushed to the hospital, but pronounced DOA. Any witnesses? Got a couple, actually, including the shooter. He's already in custody and so's his gun. Really? Yeah, we got his friend over here in this cruiser.
It appears we have a major step up. We have the shooter and we have the weapon.
right, let's take a look at the scene.
We have a puddle of blood on the sidewalk in front of the main window of the store, which is apparently where this victim collapsed.
Toilet paper, huh?
Yeah, I got a t-shirt here too.
Guy must have been hemorrhaging pretty bad.
Most likely, all of these items were used to stop the bleeding on the victim before medical arrived.
I got blood drops.
There is a pattern of blood moving toward the 2 cars in the lot.
Nice cars.
Yeah, our victim was a passenger in this car with his buddy, and our suspect was driving this car with a friend of his.
All right, I'm gonna take a look in the victim's car. Why don't you take the suspects?
You got it.
So you have 2 sports cars where speed and power are important. It speaks to the personality of the owner.
Is this something that could possibly lead to road rage? We've seen road rage be involved in a lot of deaths and a lot of murders. Not just accidental deaths where they crash, but one guy gets mad enough to where he actually shoots at another one. This wouldn't be the first time it's happened this year. We had another case in that same year where just that happened, a road rage incident, and a guy pulls a gun out and shoots somebody. So it's quite possible that these guys were either racing, got mad at one another, maybe one cut the other off, they're playing games with the cars. The idea of road rage really does come to play, or at least the thought of it does come up when we're starting this investigation. We don't know what's going on. There's a lot of possibilities.
Looking at the interior of the car, there's no evidentiary value, nothing covered in blood. But it's most likely then that our victim is shot outside of his car.
Hey, Lieutenant, come take a look at this.
In the trunk, we find 41 expended casings neatly placed into an ammunition box.
What's the shooter's name?
Scott Sneed.
Well, Mr. Sneed obviously has experience with a gun.
It is not uncommon for people who routinely shoot. They recover their expended casings for purposes of reload.
But check this out. Kid's on the Olympic Development Shooting Team.
No kidding.
So Scott Sneed has an unusual skill in that he is a very good marksman. And he's involved in kind of that pre-Olympic program here.
This kid's probably a better shot than all of us.
Yeah.
By the time they come out of that training program, they are scary good shots. Their rate of accuracy is just incredible.
So, Mr. Sneed is very good with a gun. If he is going to shoot you, he is going to kill you. And Mr. Iverson has discovered that the hard way.
Let's go see what he has to say.
My first impression of Mr. Sneed is he's a scrawny little kid. His identification says he's 18 years old. He looks like he's 12.
What were you and your buddy up to tonight?
Well, I mean, we were just out for a late movie, and we got hungry, and we knew that this was going to be the only place that was open.
He says they were just going to run in, grab some food, and head on home.
Man, I'm starving.
Me too.
Hey. That's a good... Yeah, what? Do I know? You, whoa, hey, chill, bro. What's your problem? As soon as I opened this car door, this guy just rushed me out of nowhere. I had no choice. I had to defend myself.
Okay, do you know Todd Iverson? And why would he come at you like that?
I've got no clue. I've never seen that guy before in my life.
Okay.
The mere fact that Mr. Sneed reports that he doesn't even know this guy leaves an enormous shadow of doubt in his claim of self-defense. It is not common for perfect strangers to violently assault someone they don't know upon first contact.
Kenda wonders if Scott Sneed is trying to flip the script.
People shoot people deliberately and try to call self-defense. They lie about it.
Take him down to the station.
Yes, sir. Wait, am I going to jail for this?
I'll be down to talk to you later.
I didn't mean to hurt the guy, I swear, okay?
Why is it that Mr. Iverson is threatening Mr. Sneed if Mr. Sneed says he doesn't know Mr. Iverson? There has to be motivation. Somebody has to believe you're their enemy.
You want to talk to the kid who was in the car with Scott?
No, let's send him down to the station. I'll talk to him later. He's probably just going to back up his friend's story anyhow. I want to talk to the kid that was in the victim's car.
Kenda is hoping Todd Iverson's friend can shed some light on what the issue between Scott and Todd was all about.
So what's your name, son?
Joe Fleming.
How old are you?
I'm 17. How's Todd?
Well, I'm sorry to say he's not going to make it.
When I found out Todd died, it was a shock. Just couldn't believe it. Unreal at that point.
And I know this is difficult, but can you tell us how you knew Todd?
Yeah, grew up together.
I met Todd in the neighborhood because I saw him riding by on a nice BMX bike. So I jumped on my bike and went out and got to talking from there and just hit it off.
But after Todd graduated, he moved to Arizona for trade school.
So what was he doing here now?
Just visiting. He got into town a few days ago. Tonight we were just celebrating him being home.
We're all pretty excited to get all back together again and hang out. Our group of friends were just real tight.
Tonight was awesome, man. I really missed you guys.
We missed you too. I told Bob I was gonna convince you to stay for good this time.
You could try. Hey man, pull over right here. Let's get more beer.
Todd's the liquor source. He's 21. He can buy alcohol.
When we pulled in, I recognized the car in front of us. Hey, that's Sneed's car.
Oh, really? Let's get him. I'm hungry, man.
Me too.
But that movie was really good. Yeah? Do I even know you? Oh, hey, chill out, bro. What's your... Hey!
Todd did throw a punch at Scott, but missed. Didn't hit him.
So what was the deal between Todd and Scott?
Todd?
Yeah, why did Todd hate Scott?
Todd, he doesn't even know Scott. I'm the one who hates Scott.
So we are thinking random act of violence doesn't make any sense. Well, now it makes sense. Now it makes perfect sense. We're investigating the death of 21-year-old Todd Iverson. We were skeptical when our suspect, Scott Sneed, said he didn't know Mr. Iverson, but maybe he really didn't know him. We need to rethink that.
So, Joe, you're the one who has a problem with Scott. What's it over?
Well, his girlfriend Nikki is best friends with my girlfriend, but he's no good to her.
Joe is not at all keen on how Scott treats his girlfriend.
The other night, he had Nikki crying, and my girlfriend calls him to tell him off.
My girlfriend was arguing with him over the phone, back and forth, and that's when I heard the threats.
He said he would kick my girlfriend's ass if she came between him and Nikki. I would have knocked him out had he said that in front of me.
Scott made me mad. I really didn't care for the way he treated his girlfriend and the way he was talking to mine.
At the root of all of this is the normal high school drama that goes on between boys and girls. It was nothing. Perception, believed slight, perceived bad behavior, all that sort of thing. That's all.
So if Scott's problem's with you, why did Todd go after him?
I mean, I told Todd about Scott and all that he had done. And I guess he had had a few beers.
Todd understood that Joe didn't like Scott. And he's probably the leader of this little clique and probably the enforcer should something go wrong.
He was jumping out to protect my honor.
So what happened when Todd got out of the car?
Todd took a swing at Scott, and I got out to defuse the situation.
And at that point, Scott had already pulled out a handgun.
Hey, back off, bro!
Whoa! Dude, come on, let's go. Let's forget about it.
He fired a shot, went between us, which, I backed off from there. I told Todd, come on, let's not do this. But Todd stayed there.
I'm walking away. Next thing I know, I hear another gunshot. And now Todd's covered in blood.
At that moment, I was very upset. Did not have a reason to pull out a gun. Worst thing that probably would have happened that night was a little fight.
I understand how you feel. Thank you for your cooperation. Sorry about your friend.
Joe Fleming's story is eye-opening and ultimately lends credence to Scott Sneed's claim of self-defense.
Mr. Iverson is much bigger than Mr. Sneed. His size alone would strike fear into the heart of an 18-year-old kid.
However, there is still one issue keeping Kenda on the fence.
Now, a marksman like Scott's gonna hit exactly what he aims for. And he shot him dead. I know. You think he would have shot him in a non-lethal area? And you know what? Maybe he did.
Where is this victim shot? It's a demonstration of intent.
As the sun rises, Kenda heads to the morgue in search of some answers.
So the bullet perforated his right lung. He died relatively quickly.
Okay, where was the entrance wound?
Well, that's what's interesting. The bullet entered at his right shoulder, hit the clavicle, ricocheted downward into the lung. See right here where it fractured the clavicle?
Yeah, that makes all the difference.
The shooter, in this case, a competitive trained shooter, can make that bullet go anywhere. And yet he selects the upper right shoulder. It is mere accident that the bullet happened to strike the clavicle and ricochet, lacerating the lung and killing the guy. Had that round been a half-inch lower or a half-inch higher, it would have been an entry-exit gunshot wound, treatable with the Band-Aids.
So Scott was intentionally trying not to kill him. All right, thanks, Doc.
Yeah, good luck, man.
Kenda now wants to talk with Scott to see if his story does in fact line up with what he's just learned.
I want to talk to Scott some more about precisely what he did when he decided to level that weapon at his opponent. That's the key to this case. That's the key.
How you doing, Scott?
Not so good. That guy died?
Yeah, he did.
Scott, do you know where you shot Todd?
Well, I was aiming for his shoulder, but if he died, then... What, did I miss? I mean, it's like I told you before, I didn't mean to kill anybody, I swear.
I believe you, Scott. And no, you didn't miss.
He aims for a non-vital area. He hits what he's shooting at, but more importantly, he only fires one shot. He's not out of control. He's not emptying the gun into this guy. He is trying to stop his advance.
At this point, Kenda has a clear picture of what happened that night.
Two cars, by fate, by karma, by whatever means, show up in the same place at the same time. Mr. Iverson, at this point in his life, had enough alcohol in him to provide him with a motive to demonstrate his machismo. Oh yeah? That's the guy that did that? Well, I'm gonna teach that boy a lesson.
Hey! I'll help you?
Todd tries to strike you. He actually misses.
Hey, chill out, bro. What's your problem?
Hey,
you want some
Todd, man.
Get off me, bro. Hey, back up, bro. Hey, what are you gonna do with that, huh? What are you gonna do? Back up!
Scott, in fear of his own personal safety, fires a warning shot to try to tell Todd to back off and stop.
Mr. Iverson, the victim, ignores. He continues his behavior.
Back up, man. Forget about it. He's not gonna shoot me. I'm telling you, stop!
Mr. Sneed pulls up that gun and puts one in his right shoulder. It hits a bone and it ricochets exactly the wrong direction and cuts his lung in half and kills him.
You didn't give me a choice, man. You didn't give me a choice, man. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry.
Come on, man. Come on.
It's gonna be all right. It's gonna be all right. Hey, here.
No, close your eyes. Wake up. Come on, go get something. This is not gonna be enough.
He did take his shirt off and throw it towards me.
Scott had a noble reaction. He really was trying to do what he could to undo what he'd just done.
He's not dancing with joy that he has shot his enemy. That certainly speaks volumes about Mr. Sneed's intent.
I can't believe I killed him. So what's gonna happen to me?
Well, we're gonna have to figure that out.
Scott Sneed is charged with manslaughter. But when the district attorney takes the case to a grand jury, they come to a different conclusion.
The grand jury comes back indicating that they did not feel that Scott acted in a criminal manner, but he acted in self-defense. So all charges were dropped.
Unfortunately for Scott, he couldn't overcome the magnitude of what happened that fateful night.
Mr. Sneed, as it turned out, at the age of 26, committed suicide as a result of depression.
Scott Sneed apparently was a very genuine young man. That's not to say he was perfect, but when he knew he had injured someone with his gun much more seriously than he ever intended to, he went to great lengths to try to help the young man, to help Todd, who was bleeding profusely. His conscience drove him then, and his conscience indeed might have driven him to his death, because even though the law called the homicide justifiable, he struggled with the death that he knew he committed. He shut down all of his practices. He shut down his dreams and his hopes to be a marksman. He was trying to punish himself, even perhaps, to take away something in his own life to somehow feel a little bit better about the horrible thing he did. He obviously was not able to succeed in getting past what he saw as such a horror at his own hand. Scott Sneed had a very strong conscience, and that conscience seemed to never let him go. I am sure that year after year he tried to put that remorse behind him, but that one horrible, bloody night took it all away from him. He became demoralized in the years after that shooting. And as a result of that, he also became very, very depressed. And it's quite likely that in an attempt to end all that, to rid himself of his emotional pain, took his own life.
It really is tragic that Todd didn't make it. It was also tragic for Scott. And, you know, a tiny bit of luck could have changed this so much.
If I could do it over again, I probably just would have said, keep your eye or something. Keep him around. He didn't have a chance to get married, have kids, you know, do the things that we're all doing now.
It's very sad, but it is what people do. And guys like me are forced to pick up the pieces, as it were, and sweep up the crime scene and turn to the rest of the public and say, next, because there's going to be a next.
The call comes in just after midnight, the kind of call that doesn't ring so much as it cuts through the silence, sharp and unwelcome, echoing in a city that never truly sleeps, not even in 1988, not even in the fog-heavy streets of South London, where yellow streetlights bleed into wet asphalt and every shadow feels a second too long, a second too deep, and somewhere between the hiss of rain and the distant rumble of a late bus, a door has been left open, not forced, not broken, just open, as if whoever walked through it never imagined they wouldn't be coming back. By morning, the headline writes itself before the ink even dries: young woman missing, no signs of struggle, last seen walking home alone, and within hours the word begins to circulate in hushed tones, in police radios, in newsrooms, in kitchens where tea goes cold untouched, cold case, though no one says it out loud yet, not in the early days, when hope is still warm and time hasn't learned how to stretch. Her name is Eleanor Shaw, 26 years old, a junior archivist at a small legal office near the Thames, the kind of person colleagues describe as punctual, meticulous, invisible in the way people who never cause trouble often are, the kind of woman whose life leaves very little noise behind, which makes the silence after she vanishes feel even louder, like a sudden pressure change, like the city itself has inhaled and forgotten how to breathe out. Her flat is found exactly as she left it, handbag on the chair, coat still damp from rain, a kettle boiled dry on the stove, screaming silently to anyone who knows how to listen that something interrupted the routine, something pulled her attention away mid-gesture, mid-thought, mid-life, and the investigators note every detail with mechanical precision, photographing fingerprints that don't match anything in the system, bagging fibers too common to matter, cataloging absence as if it were evidence. Neighbors remember nothing and everything at the same time, a muffled argument maybe, or maybe that was another night, footsteps on the stairs, or was it the radio, a man's voice, no, a woman's laugh, memories already rearranging themselves, unreliable witnesses to a moment nobody realized was important until it was gone, and outside, reporters begin to gather, cameras hungry, microphones angled like weapons, asking questions that have no answers yet. The first week passes in a blur of searches and statements, police dogs tracing Eleanor's scent to the curb and then stopping cold, as if she evaporated into the London air, as if the city swallowed her whole, and when the Thames is dragged and yields nothing but debris and disappointment, the tone shifts, subtly at first, then unmistakably, from concern to suspicion, from missing to taken, from where is she to what happened to her. By the third week, the investigation is hemorrhaging leads, every tip collapsing under scrutiny, every promising call ending the same way, and the detectives assigned to the case start to feel it, that creeping dread that settles in when a case refuses to move, when time becomes the enemy, when the file on the desk starts to thicken not with answers, but with dead ends, and somewhere deep down, a quiet voice begins whispering a word no investigator ever wants to hear attached to a living person's name, unsolved. Then, just as the case threatens to fade into background noise, just as editors begin pushing Eleanor's photo lower on the page, a man walks into Brixton police station and asks to speak to someone about a woman who disappeared the previous autumn, his voice calm, almost polite, his hands steady, and when he says her name, Eleanor Shaw, the room seems to tighten around him, air thickening, radios crackling, eyes lifting slowly from paperwork, because he isn't reading it from a note, he isn't guessing, and he isn't asking questions. He says he knows what happened to her. What follows is not a clean confession, not a cinematic admission of guilt, but a fragmented, unsettling narrative, offered in pieces, contradictions brushing up against moments of chilling clarity, a story that places him near Eleanor's building that night for reasons that make sense until they don't, a story that mentions details never released to the public and then stumbles when pressed on the simplest facts. And as detectives exchange glances across the interview table, one thought takes shape, unspoken but electric: either this man is lying spectacularly, or he is telling the truth in the most dangerous way possible. His name is Thomas Reed, 34, a night shift security guard with no criminal record to speak of, a man who blends easily into crowds, whose face refuses to linger in the mind, and as his statement is taken down, line by line, word by word, investigators begin to realize the problem isn't what he says, it's what he can't say, the gaps in his memory yawning open like sinkholes, swallowing timelines, motives, outcomes, leaving behind a confession that points everywhere and nowhere at once. For a brief, explosive moment, London believes the case is about to be solved. Headlines erupt. London 1988 cold case reopened, suspect confession stuns investigators. Phones ring off the hook. Eleanor's parents are notified, their grief dragged back to the surface with cruel efficiency, hope and dread twisting together so tightly they're indistinguishable, and behind closed doors, detectives scramble, re-examining evidence through the lens of Reed's words, testing his claims against reality, against physics, against the brutal consistency of facts. But facts, it turns out, are stubborn things. The places he names don't line up. The times don't match witnesses. Searches based on his directions turn up nothing. No body. No weapon. No trace. And slowly, painfully, the confession begins to rot from the inside out. Some officers believe Reed is a fantasist, a man inserting himself into tragedy for reasons even he may not understand. Others argue that trauma distorts memory, that truth doesn't always arrive neatly packaged, and caught between these interpretations, the case stalls again, momentum bleeding away, public confidence cracking, until the confession that once promised everything becomes just another artifact in a growing archive of maybes. By the end of the year, Eleanor Shaw's disappearance is officially classified as a cold case. Not because investigators stop caring, but because the trail has gone cold in the most literal sense: no heat, no movement, no direction, just a city that keeps going, buses still running, rain still falling, and somewhere out there, answers buried beneath time, routine, and the uncomfortable possibility that the truth was glimpsed once, briefly, and then lost again. And long after Thomas Reed is released without charge, long after his name fades from the headlines, one question remains, unanswerable and heavy, hanging over every quiet street and dim stairwell in South London. If his confession wasn't the key, then why did it fit the lock just well enough to turn, before snapping off inside? The trouble with a confession that collapses is not that it disappears, but that it lingers, like a bad smell trapped in the walls, impossible to ignore, impossible to prove, and in the weeks after Thomas Reed walks out of Brixton Police Station a free man, detectives find themselves haunted less by what he said than by what he didn't, the pauses that stretched too long, the moments where his eyes lost focus as if he were replaying something only he could see, something half remembered, half invented, and the case file, already thick, begins to swell with annotations, question marks, handwritten notes squeezed into margins that were never meant to hold this much doubt. Eleanor Shaw's disappearance slips quietly out of the daily news cycle, replaced by louder crimes, cleaner stories, cases with bodies and villains and endings, but in her neighborhood, nothing moves on quite so easily, because the stairwell where she was last seen still smells faintly of damp concrete and disinfectant, and the neighbors still catch themselves listening for footsteps that never come, still glance at the door of her flat as if expecting it to open, as if routine might suddenly reassert itself and undo what has already been done. Investigators circle back to the beginning, retracing Eleanor's final known movements with obsessive care, reconstructing her last day minute by minute, from the moment she leaves her office just after 6, files neatly stacked on her desk, to the call she makes from a payphone near Waterloo, a short conversation with her sister, mundane, forgettable, except that it is the last confirmed sound of her voice. And when the tape is replayed years later, again and again, analysts swear they can hear tension in her breathing, a slight hesitation before she says goodbye, but tension is easy to find when you are looking for it. CCTV footage, primitive by modern standards, yields only ghosts, blurred figures crossing intersections, faces swallowed by shadow, Eleanor herself appearing once, briefly, exiting a corner shop near her flat, head down, bag over her shoulder, alone, unmistakably alone, and then she turns a corner and the image dissolves into static. A vanishing point that investigators return to so often it begins to feel cursed. The theory that refuses to die is the simplest one: someone she knew. Friends are interviewed, then re-interviewed, their alibis pressed, their timeline stretched thin, and though nothing solid emerges, small fractures appear, hairline cracks in stories once delivered with confidence, a coworker who remembers seeing Eleanor leave with someone and then isn't so sure, a neighbor who insists she heard voices in the hallway, plural, but can't describe them, can't pin them to a face, and the city's background noise fills in the gaps, a constant roar that drowns out certainty. Thomas Reed's name remains in the file, circled in red, a reminder of how close and how far the investigation came in a single breath, and when detectives quietly verify his movements on the night Eleanor disappeared, they find something unsettling. He was, in fact, working security less than a mile from her flat, a coincidence too sharp to ignore, close enough to matter, close enough to gnaw, and yet still not close enough to hold. He denies knowing Eleanor personally, denies ever entering her building, but when pressed, he admits he had seen her before, in passing, a woman he noticed because she always walked quickly, purposefully, because she never looked back, a detail so specific it sends a ripple through the room, because it suggests observation, attention, the kind that lingers unnoticed until it becomes dangerous. Psychologists are consulted. Profiles are built. Words like compulsion, false memory, confabulation begin to appear in reports. And still, nothing sticks. As months bleed into years, the case becomes a lesson in attrition, officers rotating off, new detectives inheriting the file with a mixture of curiosity and dread, each convinced they might see what others missed, each eventually discovering that the problem is not lack of effort but lack of gravity, no single piece of evidence heavy enough to pull the truth into focus. Eleanor's parents age visibly in photographs attached to appeals for information, their faces a quiet indictment of time, and every anniversary brings a brief resurgence of interest, a headline here, a radio segment there, always ending the same way: with a phone number and a plea and a silence that stretches on after the broadcast ends. Then, in the mid-1990s, a new angle emerges, not from evidence, but from rumor. A woman comes forward anonymously, claiming that years earlier, at a party she can barely remember, she overheard Thomas Reed talking about a girl who wouldn't listen, a girl who made it harder than it needed to be, phrases vague enough to be meaningless, dangerous enough to reignite suspicion, and detectives track her down, take her statement, cross-check dates, only to watch the story unravel under its own weight. Memory blurred by alcohol, faces confused, timelines collapsing into nothing. Still, the seed is planted. Reed is brought in again, not as a suspect, not officially, just for clarification, and this time, his demeanor is different, defensive, irritated, a man tired of being haunted by a ghost he insists he did not create, and when investigators ask him why he confessed in the first place, his answer lands awkwardly, uncomfortably, in the room. "I thought I could help," he says. "I thought maybe if I said it out loud, it would stop." "Stop what?" they ask. He doesn't answer. The interview ends without resolution, but with something worse, the sense that the truth is not locked away behind a single lie, but scattered, fragmented, embedded in half-truths and psychological fractures that cannot be forced into a coherent shape. By the late 1990s, forensic science has advanced, and evidence once considered useless is pulled from storage, fibers re-examined, fingerprints rerun through updated databases, Eleanor's belongings tested again with newer techniques, but progress is incremental, microscopic, and each small disappointment compounds the last, until optimism itself becomes a liability. Then, unexpectedly, another confession surfaces. This one arrives by letter, handwritten, unsigned, sent to a local newspaper rather than the police, describing, in chilling but imprecise language, an encounter with a woman matching Eleanor's description, the tone oscillating between remorse and accusation, the writer portraying himself as both victim and perpetrator, and when the letter is traced, it leads nowhere, a dead-end mailbox, a voice shouting into the void. Skeptics dismiss it as a hoax. Others argue it mirrors Reed's confession too closely to be coincidence. And once again, the case shudders, but does not move. What makes the Eleanor Shaw cold case so corrosive is not the violence, because none can be conclusively proven, but the absence, the way it resists narrative, the way it denies investigators the comfort of cause and effect, and as years pile up, the case becomes less about what happened on that rainy night in 1988 and more about what it does to the people who refuse to let it go. Detectives dream about stairwells and unanswered phones. Family members measure time in anniversaries instead of years. And somewhere in London, a man who once claimed to know everything lives under the shadow of a confession that solved nothing and condemned him to perpetual suspicion. By the time the millennium arrives, Eleanor Shaw is no longer a person in the public imagination, but a symbol, a cautionary headline, a shorthand for the kind of disappearance that cities produce and then quietly absorb, and yet, buried deep in the file, one detail continues to trouble anyone who reads it closely, the fact that Thomas Reed knew where Eleanor kept her spare key, a detail never confirmed publicly, a detail he later insists he guessed, or remembered. And in that unanswered distinction, the case waits, patient, unresolved, gathering weight as time does what it always does best, erasing certainty while sharpening doubt, leaving behind a question that refuses to fade, no matter how many years pass, no matter how many files are closed around it. Time does not heal a case like this, it calcifies it, hardening assumptions, fixing mistakes into place until they feel like facts, and as the early 2000s settle over London with their promises of renewal and modernity, Eleanor Shaw's file sits on a metal shelf in a climate-controlled room, sealed in plastic, labeled, archived, officially dormant but never truly asleep, because every few years someone opens it again, breathes dust into their lungs, and feels that same chill run down their spine. When they realize how little there is to hold on to. A new detective team inherits the case during a routine cold case review, younger officers raised on forensic television and the idea that science eventually cracks everything, and they approach Eleanor's disappearance with fresh eyes and a quiet arrogance, convinced that the truth must be hiding somewhere obvious, something their predecessors were too close, too tired, or too constrained to see, and they begin by questioning the question itself. Not who took Eleanor, but why her disappearance looked the way it did. No forced entry. No clear struggle. No ransom. No verified sightings after she reached her building. It doesn't read like panic. It reads like compliance. This reframing shifts the entire gravity of the case, pulling attention toward scenarios that had once been sidelined, toward the possibility that Eleanor let someone in willingly, not because she trusted them, but because she felt she had no reason not to, and that thought alone sends investigators back to the people orbiting her life in 1988, names long dismissed, faces blurred by time, motives never fully explored. One name resurfaces almost immediately. Martin Hale. A former solicitor at the firm where Eleanor worked, senior, respected, married, the kind of man whose reputation acted as armor, and in the original investigation, his involvement was considered so implausible it barely registered, but now, with decades of hindsight and a more cynical understanding of power dynamics, his relationship with Eleanor looks different, his late-night requests for files less innocent, his habit of walking her to the tube station less courteous, and when detectives interview him, they sense something subtle but unmistakable, irritation. Not fear. Not confusion. Irritation. He remembers Eleanor as competent, quiet, overly sensitive, a word that lands heavily in the room, and when asked where he was the night she disappeared, he provides an alibi supported by his wife, an alibi that was accepted without question the first time around, but now feels rehearsed, well-worn, like a story told so many times it no longer needs thought. Still, there is no evidence, no paper trail, no witness willing to put him near her building that night, and as tempting as the theory is, it dissolves under scrutiny, leaving behind the same hollow frustration that has claimed so many before it. Attention swings back, inevitably, to Thomas Reed. By now, Reed is older, heavier, his hair thinning, his life visibly shaped by a suspicion he insists is undeserved, and when detectives approach him again, this time armed with decades of analysis and a colder demeanor, he surprises them by agreeing to talk without hesitation, as if he has been waiting for the moment, as if the unresolved nature of the case has been gnawing at him too. This interview stretches for hours. He repeats much of what he said in 1988, but there are differences, small but significant, shifts in emphasis, changes in emotional tone, and at one point, when pressed about Eleanor's spare key, that impossible detail, his composure fractures, just for a second, just long enough for an experienced interrogator to catch it. "I told you," Reed says quietly. "I guessed." But guessing doesn't explain why he described the chipped blue paint on the keychain, or why he knew the key stuck slightly in the lock, required a twist of the wrist Eleanor's sister remembers complaining about, details so mundane they were never documented, never released, details that shouldn't exist anywhere except in lived experience. The interview ends without an arrest, without a charge, but with a renewed sense of unease, and as detectives comb through Reed's past with modern tools, something else surfaces, a pattern. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, 3 other women reported unsettling encounters near his patrol routes, incidents dismissed at the time as misunderstandings, miscommunications, nothing criminal enough to pursue, but read together, decades later, they form a constellation of warning signs, moments when Reed lingered too long, followed too closely, inserted himself into spaces he didn't belong. Still, none of those women disappeared. None vanished into thin air. And that distinction matters. What makes Eleanor different? The question becomes an obsession, and as files pile up on desks and walls fill with timelines and photographs, investigators begin to sense that Eleanor's disappearance may not have been the result of a single decision or a single person, but a convergence, a moment where vulnerability, opportunity, and chance aligned perfectly, producing an outcome no one could reverse. Then, buried deep in an evidence box no one expected to yield anything, a lab technician finds it, a partial palm print lifted from the inside of Eleanor's front door, too smudged to be useful in 1988, now just clear enough to enter into a modern database, and when the results come back, the room goes quiet. It doesn't match Reed. It doesn't match Hale. It doesn't match anyone Eleanor was known to associate with. It matches no one at all. An unknown individual, present inside her flat, touching the door from the inside, suggesting someone leaving rather than entering, someone who had been there long enough to use the exit, long enough to feel comfortable, and the implications ripple outward, destabilizing every theory built so far. If Eleanor let someone in, who was it? If someone left, where did they go? And why did they leave nothing else behind? The palm print becomes both a breakthrough and a curse, a tangible confirmation that Eleanor was not alone that night, paired with the crushing realization that the person she was with may never be identified, may have lived an ordinary life, passed unnoticed through crowds, aged, moved, died, all without ever knowing how close they came to being named. As investigators debate whether to release the discovery to the public, fearing false confessions, hoaxes, and opportunists, Eleanor's case drifts back into the headlines, cautiously, tentatively, framed once again as a cold case with new life, and calls begin to trickle in, old acquaintances, distant memories, people suddenly remembering details they swear they forgot, and among them, one call stands out. An elderly man claims that, years earlier, he saw Eleanor arguing in her doorway with someone he assumed was a maintenance worker, a man in uniform, authoritative, familiar enough not to raise alarm, and when asked why he never came forward before, his answer is devastating in its simplicity. "I didn't think it mattered," he says. "I thought someone else would say something." But maintenance records from the building show no scheduled work that night. No repairs. No inspections. No official reason for a uniformed man to be there. And once again, the case tightens, drawing breath, pulling investigators back toward Thomas Reed's orbit, toward the dangerous overlap between access and anonymity, authority and invisibility, and as the possibility settles in that Eleanor may have been targeted not because she was special, but because she was convenient, the weight of the case grows heavier than ever. Because crimes of opportunity don't announce themselves. They slip through cracks. They leave behind questions instead of answers. And somewhere between the unknown palm print, the remembered uniform, and a confession that never quite fit, the truth about Eleanor Shaw waits, suspended in time, neither buried nor exposed, just out of reach, daring anyone to try and grasp it. The danger of a cold case gaining momentum again is that it doesn't just move forward, it disturbs everything around it, shaking loose memories people had carefully packed away, forcing the past to collide with the present in ways that feel less like justice and more like intrusion. And as Eleanor Shaw's disappearance creeps back into public consciousness, detectives begin to feel the resistance, the subtle pushback from a city that would rather forget what it failed to protect. The palm print changes the rules. It reframes the night of Eleanor's disappearance not as a vanishing act, but as a moment of contact, a crossing of paths that left a physical trace behind, and investigators pore over it obsessively, measuring ridge depth, angle, pressure, trying to extract personality from flesh, but the print remains stubbornly anonymous, a signature without a name, proof without direction. What troubles them most is where it was found. Not near the doorframe. Not by the lock. But higher, closer to eye level, as if the person leaving had paused, hand resting briefly against the door, a casual gesture, unhurried, intimate, suggesting familiarity rather than fear, suggesting that whatever happened inside that flat ended not in chaos, but in control. This detail alone dismantles the idea of a sudden attack. It points instead to a quieter violence. The kind that unfolds behind closed doors. As investigators revisit Eleanor's life with this new understanding, they begin to notice patterns they once overlooked, the way she altered her routines in the weeks before she vanished, leaving work at slightly different times, taking longer routes home, declining invitations she would normally accept, small behavioral shifts that felt insignificant at the time but now read like warning signs written in disappearing ink. Her diary offers little comfort. Sparse entries. Lists. Reminders. But tucked between mundane notes about groceries and deadlines is a single line, undated, unadorned, easy to miss. Must stop being polite. No context. No explanation. Just a sentence that sits there, heavy, unresolved, daring anyone to interpret it. The detectives argue about it late into the night, some dismissing it as coincidence, others convinced it's a psychological fingerprint, evidence of an interaction that made Eleanor uncomfortable enough to note it, but not enough to escalate it, the kind of discomfort women learn to absorb, to manage quietly, until it's too late. The elderly neighbor's account of a uniformed man becomes the focal point, and when pressed for details, he recalls insignias, not clearly, but enough to narrow the field, not police, not postal, something private, something corporate, and suddenly Thomas Reed's former role as a security guard takes on new weight, not because it proves anything, but because it explains access, explains authority, explains how a stranger could feel familiar enough to be let inside without triggering alarm. But access alone is not guilt. And Reed, for all the unease he inspires, remains frustratingly unchargeable. His employment records confirm his patrol schedule. His alibi, while thin, cannot be broken. And most damning of all, his palm print does not match the one on Eleanor's door. The case teeters again, threatening to tip back into stagnation, until a development from an unexpected direction jolts it violently awake. In 2006, a separate investigation into a series of unsolved sexual assaults in South London uncovers a disturbing overlap. One victim describes being approached in her building by a man claiming to be there for routine checks, his tone authoritative, his uniform generic, his confidence absolute, and when she hesitates, he becomes insistent, stepping into her space just enough to make resistance feel awkward rather than urgent. She lets him in. She survives. And when detectives compare her account to Eleanor's case, the similarities are impossible to ignore: the method, the timing, the exploitation of politeness, the quiet coercion that leaves no obvious marks, and suddenly, Eleanor's disappearance no longer feels singular, but part of a spectrum, an escalation that may have ended in a way the others did not. Composite sketches are redrawn. Old suspects are re-ranked. And for the first time in years, the investigation moves with something approaching urgency. The problem is that the assaults occurred years after Eleanor vanished, and the suspect identified in those cases, a man eventually convicted and imprisoned, is conclusively ruled out. His palm print doesn't match, his whereabouts in 1988 are verified, and once again, the case collapses inward, leaving behind only the bitter knowledge that the pattern exists, even if the perpetrator does not. By now, the detectives working Eleanor's case speak of it in lowered voices, as if volume alone might wake something they're not ready to face, because the deeper they dig, the clearer it becomes that Eleanor's disappearance may not be solvable in the traditional sense, may not offer the satisfaction of a name, a motive, a courtroom conclusion. And yet, something keeps pulling them back. In 2009, a junior analyst reviewing archived interview tapes notices an anomaly in Thomas Reed's original confession, a phrase he repeats more than once, seemingly insignificant at the time, now ringing oddly specific. She was calmer at the end. Calmer than what? Calmer than when? At the time, investigators assumed metaphor, emotional speculation, the language of someone inventing a story, but when placed alongside the evidence of control, the lack of struggle, the gentle pressure implied by the palm print, the phrase takes on a different color. It suggests sequence. It suggests progression. It suggests presence. Reed is confronted with the phrase years later, and for the first time, he refuses to answer, his jaw tightening, his gaze dropping, a silence stretching between questions like a held breath, and when he finally speaks, his voice is barely audible. "I shouldn't have said that." The interview ends abruptly. Lawyers intervene. And Reed retreats again behind a wall of legality, leaving detectives with nothing but the echo of a statement that feels less like imagination and more like memory leaking through. Public patience wears thin. Online forums erupt with speculation, theories hardening into convictions, Reed's name dragged through comment sections and late-night radio shows, while others insist the real culprit was never on the police radar at all, a passerby, a transient, someone who slipped in and out of Eleanor's life unnoticed, taking advantage of a moment and leaving behind only questions. Through it all, Eleanor remains curiously absent, reduced to photographs and descriptions, her inner life inferred but never truly known, and that absence becomes its own form of violence, a reminder that unresolved cases don't just deny justice, they deny personhood, flattening a life into a mystery. As the 20th anniversary of her disappearance approaches, detectives prepare a final appeal, pooling everything they have, every detail once considered too small to matter, hoping that time has loosened someone's conscience, hoping that distance has made silence unbearable. They don't expect what comes next. Because just weeks before the broadcast is set to air, an envelope arrives at the station, unmarked, no return address, containing a single photograph. It shows Eleanor's building. Taken from inside. The angle low, the perspective wrong, the date stamped faintly in the corner, October 1988. And on the back, written in block letters, 3 words that land like a blow. She trusted me. The photograph does not arrive with a threat, or a demand, or even an explanation, and that is what makes it unbearable, the way it sits on the evidence table under fluorescent light like an accusation without a voice, its edges worn, its colors muted by time, yet unmistakably real, unmistakably intimate, taken from a position no stranger should have occupied, and as detectives lean in, studying the grain, the angle, the way the stairwell light spills across the frame, one truth settles heavily. Over the room, whoever sent this was there. Not nearby. Not outside. Inside. The image becomes the center of gravity for everything that follows, pulling decades of speculation inward, forcing the investigation to reorient itself around a single, undeniable fact: Eleanor Shaw was not alone in her own home that night, and the person who stood with her felt confident enough, safe enough, to document the moment, to preserve it, to keep it. Forensic analysis begins immediately, the photograph scanned, enhanced, dissected, the paper fibers dated, the ink on the handwritten message tested, and while the results confirm what detectives already suspect, the photo is authentic, the date plausible, they offer no identity, no fingerprints, no DNA, just more proof of presence without a name attached. The message on the back, "She trusted me," becomes a psychological landmine. Investigators debate its meaning endlessly. Is it a confession? A taunt? A justification? The phrasing matters. Not "she trusted him," not "she trusted us," but "me," singular, possessive, intimate, a claim that reframes the entire relationship between Eleanor and whoever took her from the world, and it forces detectives to confront an uncomfortable possibility, that trust, not force, was the mechanism that opened the door. Public reaction is immediate and volatile. The image leaks, as such things always do, and within hours it is everywhere, splashed across tabloids and forums, dissected by armchair analysts and former detectives alike, the stairwell scrutinized, the shadows measured, the perspective debated, and in the noise, one name rises again with brutal inevitability. Thomas Reed. The uniform. The access. The confession that never fit. Reed denies sending the photograph, denies ever possessing such an image, his outrage convincing enough to introduce doubt, insufficient to erase suspicion, and when his home is searched, nothing links him directly to the photo, no negatives, no camera, no keepsake hidden away, leaving investigators in the same familiar position, certain something is wrong, unable to prove who made it so. The envelope itself yields one more detail. A postmark from North London. Not where Eleanor lived. Not where Reed worked. Not anywhere previously associated with the case. A new geography enters the story, and with it, a new wave of investigation, detectives canvassing neighborhoods, checking old rental records, combing through phone directories that feel archaic now, chasing the faint possibility that the sender once lived nearby, that someone once close enough to Eleanor to earn her trust drifted away after she vanished, carrying a secret that hardened instead of dissolving. Meanwhile, Eleanor's family is notified. The photograph is not shown to them immediately, shielded behind protocol and concern, but word reaches them anyway, fragments carried by reporters and well-meaning friends, and the damage is immediate, reopening wounds that never closed, forcing them to confront not just the loss of their daughter, but the unbearable idea that she may have believed, until the very end, that she was safe. Her sister fixates on the message. She trusted me. It sounds, she says, like something Eleanor would have believed, like the kind of trust she gave freely, reflexively, assuming decency until proven otherwise, and for the first time, she wonders aloud whether the danger came not from a stranger, but from someone who asked for help, someone who presented themselves as needing her. This shifts the focus again, this time toward Eleanor's temperament, her documented tendency to accommodate, to avoid conflict, to be polite even when uncomfortable, and detectives begin re-examining her interactions through that lens, scanning old correspondence, office logs, building maintenance requests, anything that suggests a recurring presence, a pattern of benign intrusion. One detail resurfaces with unsettling clarity. In the weeks before she disappeared, Eleanor filed a minor complaint with the building manager about a man who kept coming by unnecessarily, someone who claimed to be checking meters, then fire alarms, then nothing in particular, the complaint noted, acknowledged, and promptly forgotten when no immediate threat was identified. The description is vague. The name absent. The timing exact. The building manager, now retired, barely remembers it, but when pressed, he recalls dismissing Eleanor's concern as overcautious, a misunderstanding, something not worth escalating, and the weight of that decision presses down hard on the room, because it offers a plausible, devastating narrative, that Eleanor recognized discomfort, named it quietly, and was ignored. The investigation accelerates again. Former contractors are traced. Security companies are cross-checked. Temporary workers, subcontractors, anyone with reason to enter residential buildings in 1988 is scrutinized. The list grows impossibly long. And then, almost as suddenly as it began, the momentum falters. Records are incomplete. Companies dissolved. Names lost to time. The photograph remains the only concrete link, a relic of proximity without context, and as weeks pass without further communication from the sender, detectives begin to fear it was a one-time act, a calculated reassertion of power by someone who wanted to remind the world, and himself, that he was still untouchable. Then the phone rings. Not a tip line. Not an anonymous call. A man walks into a station in North London and asks to speak to someone about an old photograph that has been circulating in the news, his demeanor controlled, his accent unremarkable, his age difficult to place, and when asked why he's come forward now, he gives an answer that chills the room. Because I recognize the building, he says. And I recognize the way the photo was taken. He doesn't say his name yet. He doesn't say Eleanor's. But he says one thing that stops every conversation around him cold. That picture wasn't taken to remember her, he says. It was taken to remember himself. And in that moment, the case shifts again, not toward resolution, but toward something darker, the realization that whoever took Eleanor did not act out of chaos or desperation, but out of intention, and that intention may have survived, intact, for decades, waiting for the right moment to surface. The man waits in a plastic chair beneath a flickering light, hands folded neatly in his lap, posture careful, deliberate, like someone who has rehearsed stillness, and as detectives approach him, they sense immediately that this is not a witness chasing relevance, not a fantasist hungry for attention, but someone who has carried a thought for a very long time and finally decided to set it down. His name is Peter Lawson. In 1988, he lived 2 streets away from Eleanor Shaw's building, a detail he offers calmly, as if geography alone might explain why he's here, and when asked what he does for a living now, he shrugs, says he worked in logistics, moved around, nothing memorable, and that in itself feels intentional, a life smoothed flat, edges sanded down, designed to leave little impression. What he remembers, he says, is the stairwell. Not Eleanor. Not her face. The stairwell. He describes the angle of the light, the way it hit the wall at night, the echo that traveled up the concrete steps when someone paused too long, and when detectives show him the photograph, his reaction is immediate, visceral, a flinch he doesn't quite suppress, followed by something else, recognition. I stood there once, he says, pointing to the exact spot from which the photo was taken. Not that night. Another night. His story unfolds slowly, cautiously, like a man testing ice with each step, explaining that in the late 1980s he worked part-time as a contractor's assistant, helping with inspections, carrying tools, learning the rhythms of residential buildings, learning when doors were left unlocked, when tenants were most likely to comply rather than question, and he insists, repeatedly, that he never met Eleanor, never spoke to her, never entered her flat. What he did do, he says, was observe. He remembers seeing a man in a generic uniform entering Eleanor's building on multiple occasions, a man who didn't belong to any company Lawson recognized, someone who moved with confidence but without familiarity, the way imposters often do, and the reason Lawson never reported it is the same reason so many people never do: it didn't feel important enough at the time. When detectives ask why he came forward now, his answer is measured. Because that photograph is wrong, he says. It's not sentimental. It's not impulsive. It's composed. He explains that the framing is deliberate, that the photographer positioned himself where he could see both the exit and the interior, a vantage point chosen by someone thinking about what they wanted to capture, and that kind of thinking, he says, doesn't belong to panic or remorse. It belongs to control. The problem is that Lawson's account, while unsettling, doesn't point cleanly to anyone, doesn't name a suspect, doesn't place a hand on a door, and yet, as detectives compare his statements to old records, something lines up. Lawson's description of the uniformed man matches not Reed's, but something else entirely, something broader, less specific, the kind of outfit anyone could assemble, the kind designed to blend rather than stand out. This pushes the investigation into a dangerous territory, the idea that the perpetrator may have been neither a known suspect nor a documented offender, but someone who exploited systems, who understood that authority doesn't need to be real to be effective, it only needs to be believable. Attention turns inward, toward the building itself. Maintenance logs are re-examined. Old tenant lists reviewed. Emergency access codes questioned. And in the process, detectives uncover a detail that had been logged, ignored, and forgotten. In the months leading up to Eleanor's disappearance, several tenants reported minor items missing from communal areas, nothing valuable, nothing worth police attention, just small disruptions, like someone testing boundaries, learning patterns, seeing what they could take without being noticed. When the reports are mapped, a pattern emerges. They cluster around Eleanor's floor. The realization lands quietly, then all at once, someone may have been moving through that building for weeks, even months, unnoticed, familiar enough not to raise alarm, anonymous enough to avoid recognition, and Eleanor's disappearance may have been the culmination of a process rather than an isolated act. Thomas Reed is questioned again, his name unavoidable, his proximity undeniable, but this time, the tone is different. They ask him not what he did, but what he saw. Reed grows tense, defensive, insisting he noticed nothing unusual, insisting he was never inside the building, and yet, when shown Lawson's description of the uniformed man, his reaction is immediate. "That's not me," he says quickly. Too quickly. Pressed further, he admits something new, that there were others like him, unofficial security, freelance, temporary workers operating in the same neighborhoods, men who shared routes, information, access, a loose network without oversight, without records that survived the years. Names surface, then dissolve. Faces remembered vaguely, then forgotten. And once again, the investigation brushes up against the limits of time. Lawson's credibility is scrutinized, his past examined for inconsistencies, but nothing disqualifies him, nothing elevates him either, and as detectives step back, they're forced to confront a bleak possibility, that Lawson may be telling the truth, that he saw something real, something dangerous, and that it still isn't enough. The photograph remains mute. The palm print remains unidentified. The phrase "she trusted me" hangs in the air like a verdict without a trial. As weeks turn into months, Lawson fades from the investigation, his contribution absorbed into the ever-growing mass of near misses and almosts, and the case settles again into uneasy stillness, punctuated only by the occasional call, the occasional memory surfacing too late to matter. Then, quietly, without fanfare, a new piece of information surfaces, buried in an unrelated file, discovered by chance rather than intent. A report from 1989. A woman found disoriented near a bus stop in North London, clothes intact, no signs of assault, memory fragmented, claiming she had been in an apartment she did not recognize with a man she believed she trusted, a man who said he was there to help her, and when asked to describe him, she offered one detail investigators dismissed at the time as meaningless. "He took a picture," she said. "Not of me. Of the door." The report was filed. No connection made. No follow-up conducted. Now, decades later, it reads like an echo. A shadow of Eleanor's final hours, refracted through survival rather than disappearance, and as detectives sit with the weight of that parallel, one thought becomes impossible to ignore: if Eleanor's case is not unique, if it is part of a pattern that only appears in fragments, then the person responsible may not be gone. He may simply be finished. And that possibility is far more unsettling than any confession ever could be. The most unsettling realization does not arrive with drama or urgency, but with a slow, suffocating calm, the understanding that whatever happened to Eleanor Shaw may not have been an anomaly, may not have been a single terrible night that slipped through the cracks, but part of a rhythm so quiet it blended seamlessly into the background noise of the city, and as detectives begin aligning Eleanor's case with others long forgotten, the shape that emerges is not a pattern of violence, but a pattern of trust. Women approached in familiar places. Men presenting themselves as helpers. Authority implied, never proven. The 1989 bus stop report becomes the thread they pull hardest, not because it offers clarity, but because it offers survival, a rare window into an encounter that ended without disappearance, and when detectives track down the woman who made the report, now in her late 50s, living outside London, reluctant but willing to talk, her recollection is halting, fragmented, but emotionally precise in ways that refuse dismissal. She remembers the man's voice first. Calm. Measured. Reassuring. She remembers believing him, not because he threatened her, but because he didn't, because he spoke the language of concern, of procedure, of someone doing his job, and when he suggested they step inside an apartment, just for a moment, she complied without fear, without resistance, until time began to slip, her memory dissolving at the edges, her sense of agency fading into something like compliance. She does not remember leaving. She remembers waking up. Alone. And when detectives show her the photograph from Eleanor's case, her reaction mirrors Lawson's, a pause, a tightening, then recognition. "That's where he stood," she says. "That's what he did." She insists the man took a photograph of the doorway after she was inside, not hurriedly, not covertly, but deliberately, as if marking a moment, as if creating a record only he would ever see, and when asked why she never pushed for more answers at the time, her explanation is devastating in its ordinariness. "I wanted it to be over," she says. And it was easier to forget. This testimony shifts the investigation irreversibly. The act of photographing doorways, stairwells, thresholds begins to look less like a souvenir and more like a ritual, a behavior tied not to memory, but to identity, and detectives begin to wonder whether the image sent decades later was not a confession, but a reminder, to himself, or perhaps to the world, that he had once existed in that space, exercised that control. The theory is chilling. Not a killer driven by rage. Not a predator driven by impulse. But someone methodical, patient, someone who derived satisfaction not from violence alone, but from orchestration. This reframing forces investigators to reconsider Thomas Reed one final time, not as the architect of Eleanor's disappearance, but as a possible mirror, a man who sensed something similar in himself, something dangerous he could not articulate, and whose confession may have been less about guilt than recognition, a man who saw the shape of the crime and mistook it for his own reflection. Reed's confession, once an obstacle, now reads like a distortion, a shadow cast by the real perpetrator's outline, explaining why it fit some details perfectly and others not at all, and why Reed could describe the end as calmer, a word that now aligns disturbingly with the survivor's account. Calm as compliance. Calm as surrender. Calm as the absence of struggle. As this understanding takes hold, detectives revisit every unsolved disappearance within a 50-mile radius from the late 1980s to the early 1990s, searching not for bodies, but for absence, for cases where nothing violent could be proven because nothing overtly violent occurred, and the list grows uncomfortably long: women who vanished from apartments, hostels, temporary housing, their cases dismissed as voluntary departures, emotional breakdowns, lives simply drifting out of focus. None of the cases are identical. That is what makes them dangerous. Because patterns that repeat perfectly are easy to spot. Patterns that evolve are not. The task force debates whether to go public with this new theory, knowing it risks hysteria, false memories, the re-traumatization of survivors who may not even recognize themselves as such, and in the end, they compromise, releasing a carefully worded appeal focused on anyone who remembers a man taking photographs in residential buildings during that period. The response is overwhelming. Boxes of letters. Voicemails. Emails from across the country. Most lead nowhere. Some blur together. But one stands out. A former photo lab technician contacts police, recalling a regular customer in the late 1980s who brought in rolls of film containing images that made her uncomfortable: stairwells, door frames, empty hallways, no people, no events, just spaces, photographed with obsessive consistency, and when detectives ask if she remembers his name, she doesn't, but she remembers his habit. He always wanted duplicates, she says. And he never picked them up himself. The implication is immediate. Someone else retrieved the photos. Someone else acted as buffer. Someone who helped him remain invisible. Investigators dig into old lab records, finding partial receipts, initials, dates, fragments of transactions that barely survived the years, and slowly, painfully, a name begins to coalesce, not as a suspect, but as an accomplice of convenience, a friend, a relative, someone who ran errands, collected envelopes, never asked questions. The name leads to a man who died in the late 1990s. Natural causes. No criminal record. And with his death, the trail fractures again, leaving behind the bitter suspicion that the perpetrator insulated himself through proximity to others, through shared routines, through the quiet outsourcing of risk. As the investigation reaches this impasse, a decision is made that feels less like strategy and more like surrender. They release the photograph publicly. Not cropped. Not softened. Not explained. Just the image and the message. She trusted me. The effect is immediate and unpredictable. Some see nothing. Others see everything. And in a small flat on the outskirts of London, a man in his 70s sits in front of a television and feels something he hasn't felt in decades, not fear, not guilt, but recognition. Because he knows that picture. He knows the angle. He knows why it was taken. And for the first time since 1988, he understands that the past has not let him go. Recognition is not a sound, but it behaves like one, vibrating through the chest, tightening the throat, forcing the body to react before the mind can intervene, and in that small flat on the outskirts of London, the man turns off the television too late, the image already burned into him, the stairwell too familiar, the angle too precise, the message too close to something he once believed no one else would ever see. His name, for now, remains unspoken. He has lived a careful life since the late 1990s, the kind defined by routines and invisibility, by habits that leave no marks, and as he sits alone, the city humming distantly beyond thin walls, he understands with a clarity that surprises him that the photograph was never meant to surface like this, never meant to be consumed by strangers, argued over, stripped of its private meaning. It was supposed to stay his. Across the city, the release of the image detonates something dormant, not just in him, but in the investigation itself, because almost immediately, tips begin to change in quality, shifting from vague impressions to specific recollections, from feelings to details, and detectives realize they have crossed an irreversible threshold, the kind that forces memories into the open whether they're ready or not. A woman in her 60s calls in, voice trembling, describing a man she encountered in 1990 who photographed the hallway outside her flat after helping her carry in groceries, explaining it away as documentation, a word that made sense at the time, the word authority always uses, and another caller remembers a neighbor's friend who took pictures obsessively, not of people, but of places, insisting that architecture revealed truth if you looked at it the right way. The city begins to remember. Detectives build a profile not from violence, but from behavior, the photographing of thresholds, the manipulation of trust, the calm assertion of legitimacy, and what emerges is not monstrous in appearance, but deeply unsettling in its ordinariness, a man who thrived on the social contract, on the assumption that politeness equals safety, and as the task force debates their next move, one option dominates every conversation. They need to provoke him. Not with accusations. With recognition. They issue a follow-up appeal, subtle but pointed, referencing the unique framing of the photograph, the deliberate choice of angle, the habit of duplication at photo labs, details only the photographer would understand, and as the appeal circulates, the man watches again, this time from the safety of his chair, heart rate steady, mind racing, and he feels something he has not allowed himself in years. A challenge. The mistake, he realizes, was not the photograph. It was the message. She trusted me was too personal, too revealing, a crack in the facade he had maintained so carefully, and now that crack is widening, letting in light, letting in scrutiny, and for the first time since 1988, he considers doing something he has always avoided, stepping forward. Not to confess. To correct the narrative. Meanwhile, detectives receive confirmation from forensic analysts that the photograph's film stock matches a limited batch distributed in London in the late 1980s, narrowing the window of origin further, tightening the noose incrementally, and when cross-referenced with lab records, a location emerges, a small processing shop that operated for only 3 years before closing, its owner deceased, its records incomplete, but its footprint unmistakable. The man knows this shop. He remembers the counter. The smell of chemicals. The way he never handed over the film himself. And as he sits in the half-light of his flat, the thought settles in with a strange sense of relief, if the truth is coming, he would rather shape it than be crushed by it. So he makes a call. Not to police. To a journalist. He chooses one known for long-form investigations, for patience, for letting sources speak until they reveal more than they intend, and when the journalist answers, the man introduces himself with a voice carefully modulated, offering context without detail, curiosity without confession. "I knew the woman you're talking about," he says. Not well. But enough to know the story being told isn't accurate. The journalist listens. That is her strength. And as the man speaks, he frames himself as a witness to Eleanor's life, not its end, describing her kindness, her reliability, her trust, positioning himself not as the violator of that trust, but as its final custodian, a narrative so carefully constructed it almost convinces him as he speaks it aloud. He offers to meet. On his terms. When the journalist informs police of the contact, the room tightens with anticipation and dread in equal measure, because this is the closest the case has come to breathing again in decades, and yet, they know better than to expect clarity, to expect remorse, to expect anything that resembles justice. They plan the meeting meticulously. Unmarked location. Controlled environment. Observers out of sight. And when the man arrives, older than they imagined, posture rigid, eyes alert, detectives recognize something immediately, not fear, but familiarity, the comfort of someone who has walked into rooms like this before and left without consequence. He does not deny knowing Eleanor. He does not confirm harming her. Instead, he speaks of proximity. Of timing. Of opportunity. He talks about how easy it was to be believed, how no one questioned someone who spoke confidently, wore the right clothes, carried himself correctly, and as he talks, his language betrays him, slipping occasionally from recollection into instruction, from memory into methodology. When asked about the photograph, he smiles, just slightly. It wasn't about her, he says. It was about the moment. The moment when trust transfers. The moment when control becomes complete. Detectives push. They ask where Eleanor is. What happened after the door closed? And for the first time, his composure falters, not in guilt, but in irritation, the impatience of someone whose boundaries have been crossed, and he stands abruptly, declaring the conversation over, reminding everyone present that he has said nothing illegal, nothing actionable. Legally, he is correct. Morally, the room feels radioactive. He leaves without being detained, without being named, without being charged, and yet, something fundamental has shifted, because he has placed himself inside the story, confirmed his presence near its center, and in doing so, has surrendered the one thing that protected him for decades: anonymity. As he disappears into the evening, detectives exchange looks that carry no triumph, only resolve, because they understand now that the case will not be solved by evidence alone, not by prints or photographs or records long lost, but by pressure, sustained and unrelenting, applied to a man who has lived too long in the quiet. And somewhere between that quiet and the noise closing in around him, the truth about Eleanor Shaw begins to strain against the surface, not ready to break free, but no longer content to stay buried. The years did not move forward so much as they folded in on themselves, each anniversary dragging the case back into the present, each passing headline reopening a wound that never sealed, and by the time the investigation entered its third decade the file had grown heavy with paper and rumor, with theories stacked on theories like bricks laid without mortar, impressive in volume, fragile in truth, because for all the ink spilled and hours logged, the central fact remained brutally unchanged. So Mion had vanished into London's night in 1988, and the city had swallowed the answer whole. Detectives rotated out, retired, died, their notes becoming artifacts rather than tools, while the streets around the original scene transformed, shops rebranded, bus routes altered, buildings demolished and rebuilt, until even standing at the supposed last known location felt like an act of imagination, a man trying to see ghosts through glass and steel. Yet the cold case never truly slept, it lingered in the background noise of the Metropolitan Police, surfacing whenever a similar crime rattled the headlines or a new forensic technique promised miracles, and each time it surfaced, hope rose briefly before collapsing under the familiar weight of uncertainty. In the mid-2000s, a task force was assembled under a banner that sounded optimistic enough to be cruel, a cold case review unit meant to re-examine unresolved files with modern eyes, and when this case landed on their desks it did so with a quiet thud, the kind that suggests inevitability rather than excitement. The lead investigator, younger than the case itself, approached it without nostalgia, without the emotional scar tissue that haunted those who had worked it before, and that distance allowed him to see patterns that others had missed or dismissed, not revelations exactly, but absences, gaps where procedure should have been and wasn't, decisions made in haste or under pressure that now looked reckless in retrospect. Witness statements were reread not for what they said, but for what they avoided, timelines reconstructed minute by minute until contradictions emerged like hairline fractures spreading through concrete. One name, barely significant in earlier reports, began to glow faintly under this scrutiny, a peripheral figure at the time, someone who had drifted through the edges of the story without ever being pulled into its center, questioned briefly, cleared quickly, forgotten almost immediately, and the reason for that clearance, when traced back, proved disturbingly thin. An alibi accepted without corroboration, a demeanor interpreted as cooperative rather than evasive, a background check limited by the technology of the era, all of it now looked less like due diligence and more like convenience. The task force reopened that thread carefully, aware that decades had passed, that memories rot and defensiveness hardens, but also aware that time can loosen tongues, especially when guilt has been rehearsed in silence for too long. They found the man living a life that appeared unremarkable to the point of invisibility, employed, married, no obvious criminal record beyond minor offenses, the kind of profile that never sets off alarms, and yet something about the way he responded to renewed contact unsettled even the most seasoned investigators. He did not react with confusion or indignation, did not ask why the past was being dredged up, instead he reacted with a kind of brittle calm, answering questions with rehearsed efficiency, as if he had been waiting for the knock for years, as if the questions themselves were familiar companions. His story had not changed, but it had not aged well either, details now clashing with updated timelines, small inconsistencies surfacing like bubbles in a pond when disturbed. Surveillance followed, not overt, not dramatic, just the quiet observation that defines modern policing, and what they saw was not criminal behavior but something arguably more telling: ritual. He walked the same routes at the same times, avoided certain streets with an almost superstitious consistency, lingered near places that meant nothing to his current life but everything to the past, and when pressed on these habits he offered explanations that sounded reasonable until placed side by side, where they collapsed under their own contradictions. The case file thickened again, not with evidence strong enough to charge, but with a pattern strong enough to haunt. Then came the first crack, not in the man, but in the wall of time itself, when a previously unknown witness surfaced, drawn out not by police appeals but by a documentary, a late-night broadcast that framed the case as emblematic of unanswered violence in a changing city. The witness claimed to have seen an argument that night in 1988, not dramatic, not violent, but tense, a confrontation that ended abruptly when one party stormed away, and the other followed, their figures swallowed by darkness. At the time, the witness said, it felt like nothing, just another moment in a city full of them, but years later, watching the story unfold on television, the memory returned with a clarity that refused to be ignored. The description matched no one definitively, but it narrowed possibilities, eliminated certain theories, and pushed others into sharper focus, and when the task force compared this account with the re-examined statements from 1988, a chilling alignment emerged, subtle but undeniable. The peripheral figure's movements that night, once vague, now intersected with this new timeline in ways that could no longer be dismissed as coincidence, and suddenly the case felt less like a fog and more like a maze, its paths still confusing but its walls now visible. Pressure mounted quietly, internally, as investigators debated how far they could push without tipping their hand, knowing that a misstep could send the suspect retreating behind legal defenses built over decades, and so they waited, gathered, refined, until the moment came not through strategy but through chance. A routine inquiry into an unrelated matter brought the man into a police station for questioning, nothing dramatic, no flashing lights, no cuffs, just a conversation, and it was there, in a sterile room far removed from the night in question, that the past finally found its voice. At first, his answers stayed within the lines of his old story, but the cadence shifted, pauses lengthened, eyes flicked toward corners of the room as if expecting something to emerge from them, and when investigators introduced a detail only the perpetrator or a close witness could know, something inside him fractured. It was not a full confession, not yet, but it was a stumble, a moment of disorientation that broke the rhythm of decades of denial, and in that silence, heavy and electric, the case seemed to lean forward, listening. He spoke then, not clearly, not coherently, but enough to send shock waves through the room, words tumbling out that contradicted his own alibi, references to places he had claimed never to have been, times he had insisted he could not remember, and when he realized what he was doing, he stopped abruptly, clamped down, asked for a solicitor, the spell broken but the damage done. Investigators sat with the aftermath, adrenaline fading into something colder, something like awe, because for the first time since 1988 the case had produced not speculation, not theory, but a living, breathing rupture in the narrative. News of the interview spread through the department in hushed tones, careful not to alert the press, careful not to ignite expectations that could not yet be met, but even in secrecy the impact was profound. The cold case, long treated as a relic, had shifted into something volatile, something alive, and with that shift came a familiar fear, that the closer they got to the truth, the more fragile it would become, that one wrong move could send it collapsing back into the darkness it had occupied for so long. Outside, the city moved on, oblivious, commuters rushing through stations built over memories they did not know existed, but within the walls of the investigation room the air felt charged, every document suddenly relevant, every decision magnified by the knowledge that they were no longer chasing a ghost, but a man who had spoken just enough to remind them that the past does not stay buried forever, it waits, patient and silent, for the moment when someone finally listens closely enough to hear it breathe. The moment he asked for a solicitor, the room changed temperature, the air thinning as if oxygen itself had decided to step back and watch, and the investigators knew that whatever came next would no longer be shaped by instinct or momentum but by precision, restraint, and the unforgiving geometry of law. The interview ended on paper, but not in spirit, because the fragments he had dropped into the silence refused to settle, they echoed through corridors and minds, replayed again and again, each inconsistency now lit from within, each denial suddenly suspect. For a cold case that had lived most of its life in abstraction, this was a seismic shift, the difference between chasing shadows and standing across from a man whose words had begun to betray him. The legal machinery moved slowly, deliberately, every step scrutinized, every action weighed against the risk of contaminating what little they had gained. Warrants were sought, justified not with certainty but with the accumulation of doubt, and when they were granted, the searches unfolded with a reverence bordering on ritual, officers stepping into spaces that had never been part of the story until now, rooms that had held ordinary life for decades while concealing whatever residue the past had left behind. Nothing dramatic announced itself at first, no hidden trophies or bloodstains waiting to be discovered, just the quiet disappointment that so often accompanies the search for truth, until it became clear that the significance lay not in what was found, but in what was missing. Certain items that should have existed, given the timelines and the man's own statements, were gone, not misplaced, not discarded casually, but removed with intent, gaps in personal history that aligned too neatly with the night in question. Financial records showed withdrawals that made no sense in context, travel logs hinted at movements that contradicted earlier claims, and while none of it was enough to stand alone, together they formed a lattice strong enough to support suspicion. The investigators rebuilt the night yet again, this time with the suspect at its center, mapping his possible routes, testing his alibi against the city's rhythms as they had been in 1988, buses running late, streets poorly lit, surveillance non-existent or unreliable, a landscape that had favored those who knew how to disappear. The confession everyone expected did not arrive neatly wrapped, it came instead as a series of pressures applied over time, interviews spaced weeks apart, each one beginning with mundane questions before circling closer to the wound. The suspect's demeanor shifted subtly with each session, confidence eroding into irritation, irritation into fatigue, and fatigue into something like resignation, as if he were slowly realizing that the story he had carried for decades could no longer bear the weight of scrutiny. He corrected himself mid-sentence, volunteered details no one had asked for, grew defensive over points that had not been challenged, and in those moments, the investigators saw not innocence but effort, the strain of maintaining a narrative that had outlived its creator. Outside the interview room, debate raged quietly among the team, a tension between those who believed they were on the brink of resolution and those who had seen too many cases crumble at this exact stage, victims of overconfidence or premature exposure. The press remained unaware, but whispers began to circulate within certain circles, retired officers, former witnesses, people who had carried their own versions of the story for years, and with those whispers came a renewed flood of memories, some useful, many not, all of them demanding to be heard. Tip lines lit up, archives were reopened, and the case, once dormant, now threatened to overwhelm the very people trying to solve it. One lead, long dismissed as unreliable, resurfaced with new clarity when paired with the suspect's recent statements, a recollection of a vehicle seen idling near the scene, its description too vague at the time to pursue, now suddenly plausible. Records from the era were incomplete, but enough remained to suggest ownership patterns, and when those patterns were traced forward, they intersected with the suspect's life in ways that felt less like coincidence and more like design. He denied owning such a vehicle, then amended his denial to say he had access to one, then claimed he could not remember, and each shift tightened the net just a little more. The community, still largely in the dark, felt the tremor without understanding its source, a subtle change in tone when the case was mentioned, a sense that something was moving beneath the surface. For the family of the missing, the change was more visceral, hope returning not as comfort but as threat, because hope carries with it the promise of answers, and answers can wound as deeply as silence. They were briefed carefully, shielded from speculation, yet even the measured language of detectives could not hide the fact that the story they had lived with for so long was beginning to mutate. Then came the moment that would later be described as the closest thing to a confession without actually being one, a late-night interview when exhaustion stripped away the suspect's usual defenses, when the careful choreography of questions gave way to something more conversational, more human. He spoke about fear, about pressure, about how easy it is for one bad decision to metastasize into a lifetime of lies, and though he never named the act itself, never crossed the line into explicit admission, the implication hung heavy, unmistakable to those trained to hear what is not said. He described the city as it was then with an intimacy that surprised even him, remembered sounds and smells he had previously claimed to forget, placed himself closer to the center of events than any innocent bystander would dare. When the interview ended, there was no dramatic arrest, no closing of cuffs, just a quiet departure, the suspect stepping back into the night much as he had decades earlier, leaving behind a room full of people grappling with the same question that had haunted the case from the start. Was this enough? Prosecutors were consulted, evidence weighed with brutal honesty, and the conclusion, though painful, was clear. The case had moved, undeniably so, but it had not yet crossed the threshold required to hold in court, the difference between moral certainty and legal proof remaining as wide and unforgiving as ever. And so the cold case entered its most precarious phase, balanced between revelation and collapse, its future dependent on threads so fine they could snap at any moment. The investigators returned to their desks, to their files, to the relentless task of turning implication into fact, knowing that time, their oldest enemy, was still at work, eroding memories, softening resolve, waiting patiently for them to fail. The suspect returned to his life, now altered in ways only he could fully understand, carrying the weight of scrutiny like a shadow that refused to let go. As London slept, unaware of how close the past had come to breaking through, the case lingered in that uneasy space between silence and truth, a reminder that some mysteries do not end with answers, but with the knowledge of how much remains hidden, and how thin the line truly is between the stories we tell to survive and the truths that eventually demand to be heard. The final stage of the investigation did not announce itself with sirens or headlines, it arrived quietly, almost apologetically, in the form of meetings that ran late into the night and mornings that began before the city had fully woken, detectives hunched over tables scarred by years of similar battles, aware that they were standing at the edge of something that might never resolve but unwilling to step back. The suspect remained free, his name still protected, his life outwardly intact, yet the weight of attention pressed in on him from all sides, a pressure not measured in warrants or charges but in the knowledge that the story he had guarded for decades was no longer his alone. Every move he made now seemed amplified, every silence scrutinized, and though he said nothing more of substance, his restraint itself became a kind of testimony, a confirmation that there was something worth protecting. Investigators returned once again to the beginning, not out of desperation but out of necessity, retracing the earliest hours with a discipline sharpened by everything they had learned since. They walked the routes at night, timed footsteps between landmarks, stood beneath streetlights that no longer cast the same shadows but still hummed with electricity, trying to feel the city as it had been in 1988, trying to understand how a single act could vanish into so much noise. The city resisted them, as it always had, its layers too thick, its memory too fragmented, but occasionally, in the spaces between traffic and conversation, something surfaced, a sense of alignment, a feeling that the past was not gone but simply obscured. Forensic science, once the savior promised by every cold case revival, offered only modest gifts here, degraded samples, incomplete records, the limitations of evidence collected before anyone imagined it might one day be tested with such precision. Experts spoke in probabilities and margins, in phrases carefully chosen to avoid certainty, and though their findings leaned in one direction, they never tipped fully into the realm of proof. It was enough to haunt, enough to persuade privately, but not enough to satisfy the standards that govern public judgment, and the investigators felt that frustration keenly, the familiar sting of knowing they were close without being close enough. The family of the missing, now decades older, watched this renewed activity with a mixture of gratitude and dread, each update a reminder of time lost and questions unanswered. They had learned to live with absence, to shape their lives around a hole that never closed, and the idea of resolution, once a distant fantasy, now carried the threat of finality. They asked careful questions, listened without interrupting, thanked the detectives even when the news was inconclusive, and in their restraint lay a quiet indictment of the case itself, a reminder that behind every file number and interview transcript lived a human cost that no statute of limitations could erase. As months passed, the momentum slowed, not because interest waned but because the available paths narrowed, each avenue explored until it ended in the same familiar cul-de-sac of doubt. Prosecutors reviewed the file again, weighing the risks of proceeding against the certainty of failure if the case collapsed in court, and their reluctance was not cowardice but realism, the understanding that a weak prosecution can do more harm than none at all. The investigators argued, advocated, presented their strongest interpretations, but in the end the decision rested on a simple, brutal truth: suspicion, no matter how compelling, is not guilt. The suspect, aware of this calculus even if he pretended otherwise, retreated further into silence, his solicitor a constant presence, his statements reduced to the bare minimum required by law. Friends noticed changes, a tightening around the eyes, a vigilance that bordered on paranoia, but no one could say whether this was the burden of innocence under suspicion or guilt finally pressed into the open. The ambiguity became part of the case's texture, inseparable from its identity, and those closest to the investigation began to accept what they had resisted for so long, that certainty might never arrive. And yet, even as the official avenues closed, the case refused to lie flat. Retired officers spoke more freely now, unburdened by protocol, sharing doubts they had carried since the early days, questioning decisions made under pressure, acknowledging errors that could not be undone. Journalists revisited their own coverage, comparing notes, finding parallels, uncovering small inconsistencies that had escaped notice when the story first broke. None of this produced a breakthrough, but it created something else, a collective understanding that the case's power lay not only in its mystery, but in what it revealed about the systems designed to resolve such mysteries. The final report, when it was compiled, did not read like a conclusion, it read like a ledger, a meticulous accounting of what was known, what was believed, and what would likely remain forever out of reach. It avoided definitive language, resisted narrative flourish, and yet between its lines ran a current of quiet conviction, the sense that the truth, while never officially spoken, had left its imprint on those who had come closest to it. The report was filed, archived, its status unchanged, unresolved, unsolved, a cold case by definition if not by spirit. Life moved on, as it always does, indifferent to the demands of closure. New cases took priority, new victims filled the news, and the city continued to reinvent itself, streets renamed, buildings replaced, memories overwritten by progress. But for those who had lived inside the case, who had followed its twists and silences for years, the ending lingered, unresolved not just in fact but in feeling, a story without punctuation, trailing off rather than concluding. Sometimes, late at night, one of the investigators would find himself thinking about a particular detail, a moment in an interview, a hesitation that felt heavier than words, and wonder whether that was as close as anyone would ever get. Sometimes the family would revisit old photographs, tracing familiar faces, imagining alternate futures that branched off from that single night, futures that would never be realized. And sometimes, somewhere in the city, a man would pause mid-step, caught by a sound or a shadow, and feel the past press in, relentless, unforgiving, a companion he could never outrun. The case did not end with justice delivered or innocence proclaimed, it ended with endurance, with the quiet understanding that some truths exist without validation, carried forward by those who sense them even when they cannot prove them. It remained a cold case in the records, but it was anything but cold in the lives it touched, its heat sustained by memory, by doubt, by the human need for answers even when answers refuse to come. And so the story settles not into resolution, but into echo, a reverberation that continues long after the last official word has been spoken. London, vast and indifferent, holds the secret still, its streets bearing witness without confession, and the night of 1988 remains suspended in time, a point of darkness that the light never quite reaches. The investigation has stopped, the files closed, but the question endures, whispered in the spaces between certainty and belief, reminding anyone who listens closely that some cases do not ask to be solved, only to be remembered. What followed after the files were closed was not silence but a different kind of noise, a low, persistent hum that lived beneath official conclusions, because a case like this does not truly end when paperwork says it does. It migrates, it seeps into conversations, documentaries, pub debates, late-night radio segments, and the private thoughts of people who were never meant to carry it. The cold case status became less a designation and more a warning, a signal that the truth was still somewhere out there, unclaimed, unspoken, resisting the gravity that pulls most stories toward resolution. Investigators moved on in title but not in mind, catching themselves measuring new cases against old failures, seeing echoes where none officially existed, haunted by the idea that closure had been close enough to touch and yet permanently out of reach. Years passed, and with them came technological advances that once again tempted fate, algorithms designed to find patterns humans miss, data mining tools capable of cross-referencing decades of records in seconds, and for a brief moment the case flickered back into institutional consciousness, reopened not with fanfare but with a cautious curiosity. The files were digitized, every statement, photograph, and scrap of evidence converted into something searchable, sortable, reducible to data points, and the hope, unspoken but present, was that the machine might see what people could not. The results were underwhelming, correlations without context, probabilities without meaning, and yet even in their failure they reinforced an uncomfortable truth: the case was not unsolved because it was too complex, but because it hinged on a human moment that had slipped past observation. The suspect aged visibly now, his hair thinning, his posture stooping, the sharpness that once unsettled investigators dulled by time, and with age came a new variable, mortality, the ticking clock that eventually renders every secret ownerless. Some believed that death would bring confession, that a letter would surface, a final admission released too late to prosecute but early enough to explain, and others believed the opposite, that silence had become too ingrained, too essential to his identity to be surrendered even at the end. The man himself gave nothing away, declining interviews, avoiding attention, his life shrinking into a careful routine that minimized exposure, as if he understood that the greatest risk now was not arrest but remembrance. Journalists, sensing the story's lingering power, returned to it periodically, framing it not as a failure but as a meditation on uncertainty, and with each retelling, details shifted subtly, emphasis changing with cultural mood. One year it was a story about policing limitations, another about forensic optimism, another about the cost borne by families left behind, and through it all the core remained unchanged: a single night in London, a disappearance without witness or proof, a truth inferred but never spoken aloud. The case became symbolic, a shorthand reference in discussions of justice delayed and justice denied, its specifics blurred for those who had not lived through it, sharpened painfully for those who had. For the family, time did not soften so much as reconfigure their grief, turning sharp edges into a constant ache, and they learned to navigate a world that periodically reopened their wound in the name of public interest. They participated selectively, agreed to interviews when they believed it might help, declined when it felt exploitative, and in their restraint lay a dignity that contrasted starkly with the hunger for answers that surrounded them. They spoke less about resolution now and more about acknowledgement, about the simple recognition that what happened mattered, even if it could never be proven beyond doubt. Inside the Metropolitan Police, the case became a teaching tool, stripped of names and specifics, used to illustrate the importance of early decisions, of evidence preservation, of humility in the face of uncertainty. New recruits studied it without knowing its emotional weight, analyzing it as an abstract problem, and veterans watched quietly, aware that no lesson could fully capture the lived reality of chasing a truth that refuses to be caught. The case lingered in training rooms and internal seminars, its presence a quiet reminder that not every effort is rewarded, that some battles end not in victory or defeat but in stalemate. Every so often, a rumor surfaced, a supposed deathbed confession, a handwritten note, a neighbor who claimed to have heard something years ago, and each time the machinery stirred briefly, checks made, facts verified, only for the lead to dissolve under scrutiny. The pattern became familiar, hope flaring, then fading, leaving behind a residue of exhaustion that grew heavier with each cycle. The investigators who had once lived and breathed the case learned to brace themselves against these waves, skeptical but never entirely immune, because to abandon hope entirely would be to concede something fundamental about why they had chosen the job in the first place. The city itself seemed complicit in the case's endurance, its vastness offering endless places for secrets to hide, its constant reinvention erasing physical traces while preserving the emotional ones. The streets where it all began were now unrecognizable, layered with new histories, new tragedies, new joys, and yet the idea that something unresolved lingered beneath them gave those places a faint charge, a sense that the past was not gone but dormant. London carried the story the way it carries so many others, without comment, without confession, holding on to what it knows without ever revealing it. As the decades stretched on, the cold case ceased to feel cold at all, its temperature sustained by those who refused to forget, and in that persistence lay its final, unsettling power. It challenged the assumption that every story owes us an ending, that truth must eventually surface if we wait long enough, and instead offered a more uncomfortable possibility, that some truths remain just beyond reach, not because they are unknowable, but because they arrive at the wrong moment, in the wrong form, or attached to people who will never let them go. In quiet moments, former investigators still replayed that near confession, that hesitation, that fracture in the suspect's narrative, wondering if there was something they missed, a question not asked, a silence not held long enough. They understood, intellectually, that hindsight is a luxury, but understanding did little to silence the doubt. The case lived on in those doubts, in the space between what was said and what was meant, in the lingering sense that the truth had brushed past them close enough to be felt but not grasped. And so the story continues without advancing, looping endlessly in the collective memory, a cautionary tale, a source of fascination, a wound that never quite scars over. It remains a cold case in name only, sustained by the heat of unresolved questions and the human refusal to accept that some answers may never come. Somewhere between the official record and the whispered belief, between evidence and intuition, the truth waits, unchanged by time, indifferent to classification, held fast by a city that has learned how to keep its secrets.